Hi vlogs! Are you guys ready to explore Alaska? If so, let's go! Even though the fact that Alaska might have one of the smallest populations in the United States, there is a diversity of its residents. It is a combination of various tribes that are based on both linguistic and cultural similarities of people living in different regions of Alaska. The beginnings of Alaska occurred between 20,000 and 16,000 BC, in the age of the woolly mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers. This is considered as the first migrations of Paleolithic people, the first group of people in America, known as the Native Americans or indigenous people. These people crossed over into Alaska via the Bering Land Bridge. It was a land bridge that connected Asia to North America, also known as the Central Parts of the Beringia, which today is defined as a land and the maritime area bounded on the west by the Lena River in Russia. When the last ice age ended, the land bridge began to disappear beneath the sea, since the global sea levels increased as the west continental ice sheet melted, liberating billions of gallons of fresh water. As a result, nowadays the Bering Land Bridge is submerged. After that, there was an emergence of the new routes to the continent. Humans traveled into Alaskan interior and the Yukon, a territory in the northwest Canada. They eventually sought out to the Arctic region and toward the temperate regions to America. The first definitive archaeological evidence for the presence of the people beyond Beringia and interior Alaska comes from this time, about 13 years ago. These people are called Playo-Indians by the archaeologists. The genetic evidence displayed that mitochondrial DNA passed from the mother to the offspring that are present in today's Native Americans. This indicates a population isolated from the Siberian mainland for the thousands of years, who are the direct ancestor of the nearly all of the Native American tribes in both North and South America. Therefore, this was the truly beginning of Alaska. In the mid-18th century, Russian explorers initiated trading with Alaska. During that time, Alaska was occupied by approximately 80,000 indigenous people. It would be comprehended as the time of the contact, which means the earliest time when the native group had a significant direct interaction with the Europeans. Russia extended its empire to Alaska across the Siberian. In addition, hunters and fur-bearing mammoth trappers also made a leading headway in Alaska. Russia began settling along the Alaskan Peninsula and the Aleutian Islands, but only few of them actually settled in Alaska. Instead, the settler became the main object of the Russian hunter-traders who stayed long enough to accumulate the bounty. The Russians fought the Aleut natives who live in the Aleutian Islands and the nearby Alaska Peninsula to hunt the sea otters and fur seals for them. Those Russians, taking advantage of the expertise and equipment of the Aleutians, had developed over the thousands of years of living in the marine environment. Consequently, these Aleuts brought new diseases from the European continent because they did not have immunity to those illnesses. The Aleut population declined by at least 80% during the first and the second generations of the Russian contact. By the early 19th century, the Russian settlers had established their permanent settlements along the Alaska Panhandle, the larger Wash Sitka. Later on, there was the Purchase Treaty occurred between Russia and the United States, which made this area called the Russian America. In the late 1867, Russia was formally transferred from the ownership and dominions of Russia's empire to the United States, which was ratified by the U.S. Senate and signed by the President Andrew Johnson. This island was sold for a princely sum of $7.2 million. After the signing of the Purchase Treaty, many of these Russian citizens opted to return to their homeland, but a few stayed. Therefore, it's a common thing for Alaskan citizens with the Russian surnames even today. So why did Russia sell their overseas colony to America? And why did they not sell to Britain or other colonial powers instead? The first reason was that Russia was defeated in the Crimean War, which took place in October 1853 to February 1856. It was the war fought mainly in the Crimean Peninsula between Russia and the British, France, and Ottoman Turkish. After the war ended and Russia lost, it caused a huge impact on Russia's economy, which largely would lead to the bankrupt. As a result, Russia was struggling to pay debt, so it was one of the main reasons why they had to sell Alaska. The next reason was that the victory over the Royal Navy over the modernizing Russia had made it clear that Russia was not ready and had a long way to go before they could challenge Britain at sea. Moreover, this could make the Russian leaders realize that even if they shoot another war, it would cause only a tiny effect to seize Britain from conquering the territory via Canada. So this was why Russia did not sell Alaska to Britain, since they were the imperial rivals, and offer Britain a large coastline which was extremely close to Russia was apparently dangerous and a threat for them. Besides, Britain was not interested in Alaska as they already had Canada, which also made Britain have enough access to the Pacific Ocean. Therefore, America seems to be the only candidate to buy Alaska at that time, because they were seeking for the reconstructions after the end of the Civil War, and purchasing Alaska seemed to be a useful distraction. Moving on to the first wave of immigrations, in July of 1897, there were two ships docked in San Francisco and Seattle carrying miners returning from the Yukon with the bags of gold. The press was alerted and this hot news became mass. Soon, miners of all shapes and sizes called the Stampeders were on their way to the gold fields. Within 6 months, approximately 100,000 gold shakers set off for the Yukon. Only 30,000 completed the trip. Most stampeders knew little about where they were going, although people weren't sure whether or not there would also be gold in Alaska. Thousands of people came north in the hope of becoming rich. So the pamphlets were available for them to help on their way. Many of the pamphlets contained little or no real information and made the outrageous claims of wealth to be had by everyone. This included food, clothing, tools, and camping, mining, and transportation equipment. Eventually, gold was ultimately discovered outside the north, which is located in Alaska, and then a steady stream of the gold rushers flocked to the region. The next wave of immigration was the oil boomer. For the rest of the 19th century and into the 20th, Alaskans' populations continued to increase due to the copper mining, fishing, and the canneries. After the oil discovery, which was found in the Prudhoe Bay, there was another influx of immigrants into Alaska. Most people moved to Alaska, looked for a job, and worked in the pipelines. Today, oil remains as a major industry in Alaska and still draws people to the state to search for an occupation. From both waves of immigration, it could be obviously seen that most people came to Alaska with the purpose of being rich and seeking for prosperity. Alaska has a sizable immigrant community. Look at the pie chart, you'll see that roughly 8% of Alaskans were born in another country, while 10% are native-born Americans who have at least one immigrant parent. Foreign-born residents also represent vital elements of the state's laborers in various sectors. More than a third of workers in manufacturing industry are immigrants, and nearly 1/4 in the finance and insurance industry. Next, look at the table. You'll see that most immigrants in Alaska have pursued education at or above the college level. Nearly 30% of adult immigrants had a college degree or more education in 2018, while almost 12% had less than a high school diploma. Today, Alaska's diverse native people remain a strong presence in Alaska. Rapid changes in communications, transportations, and other services to remote villages have dramatically changed the native life. Nevertheless, much of the native culture is still practiced. In many areas, particularly around the rural villages, native hunts, fish, and gathers the same plants and animals as their ancestors and continue to practice much of their traditional culture. Next, let's talk about the culture. The first thing that I'm going to introduce you is the totem pole. Totems are symbolic representations of animals and humans. Each tribal family's heritage is carved into the totemic designs of representative Alaskan wildlife, such as the wolf or eagle. Europeans gave the name totem pole to the carved wooden pole made by the Northwest Indian tribes such as the Tingles Indians. Since they had no written language, then the Tingles used the totems for recording family historical events. Totem poles are read from the bottom up. The order of the chest tells the story of the particular polect and other important event. Poles were built for different reasons, for example, to show that one owed a debt to another, as a wall to support and as a part of the entrance to a home, as a memorial and a container for the cremated remains of the persons, and to commemorate special occasions such as the pillage, wedding, or the battle. The height of the pole was a sign of the wealth and power. Next is the natives' arts. Alaska native culture is beautifully illustrated through the arts, whereas indigenous groups are known for their special talents and distinct styles of carving or weaving, or for their unique tribal dances and drumming. Visitors to Alaska can experience performances of the traditional music and dance and see numerous examples of both ancient and modern native arts in the villages, galleries, and museums. The silver hand is the handcrafted items found in the galleries and shops of the native artwork, make very special gifts and are the wonderful way to remember your trip to Alaska. The third one is dog sledding or mudging. Dog sledding, more popularly called the mudging, traces its roots back to the Eskimos of the 15th century. It remained the primary mode of the winter transportation in Alaska's bush country until the pilots began flying aerials in the 1920s. Today, marching is mostly a recreational sport, some march for sheer pleasure, while others compete in a wide variety of races. During the month of March, the whole state of Alaska tunes in daily updates on the progress of the Iditarod racers. Next, fly to the village. Since the faraway native village is the tourist trap, which is more incredible than you ever imagined. However, because of the long distances, we need to fly to each place and village instead. The most popular village tour is the Alaskan Airlines Day or overnight tour to Barrow. The harsh climate, simple buildings, and warm people are unforgettable, and you'll get a lot of the insight from your guide. But an even more adventurous way to experience the village is to fly to one on your own. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is the Inupiat drum and dance. Alaska native music and dance traditions are unique expressions of the culture and spirituality. Each village has its own unique style of dance and music, reflective of the place in its geographical environment and history. In the 1960s to 70s, the Inupiat were among the many native communities who joined together to stand up against the repressions of the cultures and threats on native lands by the state. A resurrection began and led to the cultural renaissance for many Alaska Native tribes, alongside the civil rights movement and the influential 1971 Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which created the several native regional economic development corporations. Moving on to food. The radiant hot dogs is the Alaskan hot dog variety in which the sauces are made with Caribbean, pork, and beef. Apart from the split and grilled hot dog, the steam bun is topped with the Coca-Cola glass onions, mustard, and cream cheese, while the ketchup and relish might also occasionally be added to the combination. Vineyard sauces can be found on our breakfast offerings at our hotel and lodges. These hot dogs are said to be so good and delicious. Besides, they are even being made and sold in other parts of the country, such as Denver and Portland. Next is anything salmon. With such an abundance of wild salmon, it's not hard to see why the pink fish makes the list of the important Alaskan dishes. From May to October, tens of thousands of salmon swim from the open ocean into Alaska River to spawn. The native fish is enjoyed fresh, smoked, baked, and perfectly paired with the cream cheese on the morning bagel. The guest will have the ability to experience the diversity of salmon in Alaska. Do you love dessert? For me, I really love dessert. So, I'm going to tell you about the Eskimo ice cream, in other words, the Alguda. The Eskimo ice cream is the delicacy sweet that Alaska natives have enjoyed for thousands of years. This is so contrast when compared to the creamy and deli fusion of ice cream. Since Eskimo ice cream is derived from animal fats and oils mixed with berries and occasionally ground fish. The word "Algudog" is actually a Yupik word, meaning mixed together. These high-calorie concoctions kept the hunters energized and healthy while long expeditions in the cold and dangerous landscape. Moving on to coffee. Kaladi Brothers coffee is very popular in Alaska. Coffee in Alaska is a part of the cultural identity. The coffee's popularity has something to do with the varying sunlight through the seasons. Whatever the reason, in Alaska, coffee has a great present. Making its first appearance in 1984, Kaladi Brothers Coffee offered its first cup of coffee. Hi class, this is such a big warning. The next part which I'm going to show you might consist of some bloody pictures. So if you can't handle the bloody things, please skip that. But if you're ready, let's go. So this part will be about the seal butchering. These seals are spotted seal, which are also known as the laka seal or laka seal. They are not consumed as food by the Inupiat people, even though some places in Alaska eat the spotted seals. The people of the Swiss Reef only ate the spotted seals during the striping times. Otherwise, the meat is used to feed dog teams. Their skin, however, are beautiful and used in making mittens, hats, ornaments, and just about anything else. Next is muktuk. Muktuk is a traditional food among the Inuit people. It provides nutrients such as the vitamin C and is an excellent source of energy. It's the combinations of well butter and skin frozen together and usually eaten raw. It's a pretty dish, but you would have to be a pretty brave enough to try it. Let's talk about the tourist attraction. The Arctic is one of the best tourist attractions in Alaska where you cannot miss to visit. If you're seeking for an unforgettable trip, you must visit Arctic in Alaska, where it's filled of the incredible and wonderful glacier and northern light. Moreover, you'll have an opportunity to experience the culture and traditions of native Alaskans. Alaska's far north will leave you with a lifetime of the memories and stories to share. I speak like a person who used to go there, right? But I've never been there before. However, I would definitely go there once in my life before I die for sure. So I suggest you to go there. So here is the questions. What is the similarity between the first and the second wave of the immigration? What are the main reasons why Russia sold Alaska to the United States? And the last one is, in the parts of the culture which some of you may skip, it shows the local foods of some native Alaskans which consume the seal as the food. So, what do you think about this point? Tell me, why do you think like that?
So, just like other groups of immigrants, there are some problems occur within these native Alaskans as well. One of those issues is the concerning of the stereotype as comparing to the Native Americans or American Indians. First, the American Indians and Native Alaskans were seen as the same ethnic group, but in fact, these two groups have their own cultures and traditions, particularly. In case you guys couldn't imagine, this is Native Alaskans and this is Native Indians. They look alike, right? Mentioning the other main issue concerning stereotype that these Native Alaskans had to face. It has to do with their name, or the way they were called by other races. As you know, these people are known as Eskimo, and this word actually meant to refer to the Inuit and the Yupik people. However, it became unacceptable for them to be called as Eskimo because this term was actually imposed since the colonial age. It's some kind like racism or something like that. Also, this term was firstly established by the outsiders or the non-indigenous people, which the natives want to get rid of this and returning to their traditional and cultural names. So, what they actually prefer is rather to be called by their names in their own language, like Inuit or Yupik. The term Eskimo is now therefore less likely being used in general, and the word Inuit is instead the one that is used to refer to these native Alaskans. When talking about the meaning, Inuit means people in the language, while Eskimo means the native of snowshoes. Therefore, some people consider it as offensive, since the meaning can be translated to as eaters of raw meat as well, which is obviously rude. That's why these native Alaskans wanted to get rid of it. However, by using the term Inuit instead of Eskimo, still has conflict among these indigenous people themselves, because this term actually works in only some areas like northern Alaska or Canada. And the Yupik people really don't get along with this term, since it gave them the feeling as the outsiders, even though they share cultural characteristics with the Inuit. Here's the next question for you guys. When talking about the native Alaskans, what actually comes up first in your mind? Their stereotype that you can see. Apart from the stereotype issue, There are some more problems that these native Alaskans had to face. It's about laws and regulations since decades ago. Regarding the history, the United States military once occupied Alaska for a while. By that time, Alaska was exploited by the United States laws and regulations. To say, segregation and assimilation still occur during that period. For example, school was segregated. There were only white children who attended school, but however, they still aimed to provide good education for these native Alaskans. Another example of the exploitation is the political participation in which the rules and the conditions were all set up by the US. One of those conditions states that the voters must be educated and be able to read and write English language, just like in the US itself. Additionally, when talking about laws and regulations, policies in Alaska were still neglected. There were several acts had passed by the Americans, such as the 1884 Organic Act and the Second Organic Act of 1912. To explain, the basic of this act is about how the states will be governed, also exercising of the federal power within the states itself. These acts actually did nothing but only raise the question to the native Alaskans whether these natives had the true rights to their own lands and titles, or just unequal to the non-indigenous people. It's all about Aboriginal rights regarding the US laws and regulations. So, since the native Alaskans can be considered as native people, they were counted with the tribal Indians when laws are applied to. To begin with, as the time passed and the issue of equality had been emphasized, mostly the laws had been regulated to benefit the native Alaskans. The first significant example is to deal with the land claims for native Alaskans, namely the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or the ANCSA. Basically, this law was signed by Richard Nixon in December 18, 1971, in order to give the natives for land claims. This law actually can be considered as the largest land claims settlement in the US, since it solved the problem about territory and fixing the economical conflict and problems throughout Alaska. It had involved 12 regions of Alaska Native regional corporations and over 200 local villages. This law actually benefited them, obviously. Besides, there are basically 3 laws that passed by the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States. And this organization actually associated with the Alaskan tribes. These examples actually affected these natives in optimistic ways by considering their interest. First one to mention is the 1984 Indian Policy, or the Policy for Administrations of Environmental Programs on Indian Reservations. This policy concerns with the tribe's interest by carrying the policy's detail about human health and environment. It was signed in 1984. The second one is the direct implementation in Indian country. This policy is basically about the authorizing power of the EPA, for it's responsible for environmental issues within the Indian country. In other words, the EPA has full power when implementing laws concerning environmental issues. The last one is the TAS, or the Tribal Assumption of Federal Laws. This one is to deal with the treatment of tribes as reserve. To say, this law gives power to the tribes for being treated as one of the states. When there are environmental laws implemented, it would subsequently apply to the tribes. For example, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act are the ones that actually apply to the tribal areas. To clarify, the existence of the tribes, which actually including Native Alaskans, must meet the requirements that the TAS policy of the EPA lists. First, it must be federally recognized. Second, it must have the governing actor for when to deal with the governmental duties and powers. Third, it must have appropriate authority within the tribes. And last, it must be able to accept and follow the programs. So, as I mentioned earlier, that most laws actually give benefits to the Native Alaskans. There's another example of laws that give advantage to them. Basically, numerous laws had been implemented by the Alaska Legal Services Corporation concerning the natives' interests like land claims, fisheries, and tribal self-government. Additionally, this organization also concerns about the health care and housing as well. To conclude everything concerning laws and regulations, these natives were fully advocated by several organizations, including those that the United States own. Even though the Native Alaskans seem to have beautiful life from the laws and regulations that the US provided, there are still some current issues concerning their living conditions in the states as well. To say, these Native Alaskans encounter the marginalization among themselves, that they were living in poverty and uneducated. In some extents, some Native Alaskans actually receive good education and careers, but there are some groups among the natives themselves that had to face some problems like these. Apart from poverty and uneducated problems, some of them had to face the problems of alcoholism, suicidal, and accidental deaths of their family members, which made them live through days even harder. In addition, these Native Alaskans also had to encounter the melting problem of the permafrost due to the climate change. When it happened, their buildings were destroyed and melting, requiring some more money from the US to rebuild their housing in order to survive. So, just like many other countries, there are several movies and stars that came from Alaska, or like those things portray the idea of Native Alaskans. So, let's talk about the movies first. Actually, there are several movies about Alaska. Just like you all can see in the movie, Alaska has been portrayed by the Eskimo, living in the middle of snow and facing snowstorms or something like that. So, here I list 2 examples of the movies that's about Alaska for you. The first one, I think, is the best example of the movies that are related to Alaska. It's called Eskimo. The film is a prequel drama, so not to be confused. According to the prequel.com, the prequel drama refers to the period between the motion pictures from the arrival of sound to the mandatory enforcement of the Motion Picture Production Code since 1927 to 1934. This film is directed by W.S. Van Dyke based on two books as listed in the slide. And most importantly, the film was shot in the Native American language, or the Inupiat. And honestly, the actors find it quite difficult to pronounce some sounds of this language, such as KH sound or K sound. The film portrays several cultures and traditions of these native Alaskans, like hunting or their living conditions in the state. During the production, it was based in the city in Alaska named Taylor, where facilities and housing for movie production were all built in that city.
Eskimo people in the world live in the Arctic regions of North America. Altogether, there are only about 35,000 Eskimos. Here in the frozen north, the land is barren, and food is very scarce.
Since the film was released in 1933, its motion pictures had received the first Oscar for the category Best Film Editing. So, in case you guys wondering, the plot of the film is mainly about Mala, the unspecified Eskimo tribal member struggling with his life involving with white men. The struggles occurred since his wife was raped and dead. He had suffered and messed up for a long time, also being accused for being savage. However, since the film, as I said, portrays the life of Eskimo, some critics state that this film, Eskimo, instead depicted the life of white human or the noble savages, not the normal life of human being.
Father is a good shot. We hope that the animal he has shot is fat, for we must eat fat meat to keep our bodies warm during the cold winter.
The next one, I can say that you guys should have heard of this film, or at least most of you guys. The Brother Bear. It is an American animated comedy drama film produced and released by Walt Disney in 2003. And just like the first film, The Brother Bear received an Oscar nomination in the category Best Animated Picture. The film took place during the Ice Age era in Alaska and is basically about an Inuit boy named Kenai and a bear which he took him on purpose. Undoubtedly, the film shows the cultures and traditions just like the Eskimo film, but lesser in a way that The Brother Bear is an animated film entertaining children, not to portray the native Alaskans' life. The Brother Bear 2 was later released in 2006 after this first one for 3 years. So, here's the last question for you guys. Are there any other movies about native Alaskans that you can find on the internet? List 1. Since we have movies about native Alaskans, thing that could not miss is celebrities that came from Alaska. So, mostly Inuit actors and filmmakers produce their works in Canada. But one that produced works in America and actually came from Alaska is Irene Bedard, an Alaska-born actress who portrayed as Native American in numerous films. She has Inuit and Cree ancestors, also grew up and graduated in Alaska before becoming an American actress. Her most famous work was the voice speaking in the film Pocahontas, and also being the physical role model for this main character, Pocahontas, in this film. So, if to mention herself for portraying the Native American value, it is obviously shown in her appearance that she looks obviously like a Native American. Besides, she portrays the role of Native American in several films, and that, therefore, it can be considered as her way to convey the natives' perspective and values. undeniably.